The heat in the basin didn't just sit. It pressed down like a physical weight, flattening the scrub brush and turning the air into a shimmering curtain of dust and light. This was a land where the wind carried grit instead of rain, a place where survival wasn't a guarantee, but a daily negotiation with the elements. Corbin Thorne understood this negotiation better than most. He had chosen this isolation, carving a life out of the shallow valley where the grass grew thin and the nearest neighbor was a 2-day ride south. He wanted no questions, no trouble, and above all, the kind of silence that allowed a man to forget the noise of a world he had left behind. But that Tuesday afternoon, the silence broke. It wasn't a sound that alerted him, but a shape where no shape should be. Corbin was walking toward the well, a bucket swinging rhythmically in his calloused hand when he saw the collapse against the rough-hewn wooden fence. At first, he thought it was a trick of the heat, a shadow cast by a passing cloud, but as he drew closer, the shadow resolved into a figure. A young woman, taller than any he had ever seen, slumped in the dirt. Her dark hair was matted with the dust of the trail and dried blood, and her breathing was shallow, a ragged hitching sound that spoke of severe dehydration. She wore deerskin, intricate and worn, with beadwork that Corbin recognized instantly. It marked her as Apache. In this territory, that distinction usually meant one thing: danger. But looking at her cracked white lips and the exhaustion etched into her features, Corbin didn't reach for the Colt Navy revolver at his hip. Instead, he reached for the ladle. He dipped it into the cool darkness of the well, bringing it up dripping and silver in the harsh sun. When he knelt beside her and offered the water, her eyes snapped open. They were dark, swimming with suspicion, perhaps expecting a blow rather than mercy. She flinched, her hand twitching toward a knife sheath that was currently empty. Corbin stayed still, the ladle extended. "Drink," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. She stared at him, measuring him with a gaze that felt older than her years. Then desperation won. She drank. She drank 3 times, gulping the water down with a ferocity that pained him to watch. When she was finally done, she used the fence to pull herself upright. She towered over him, silent and imposing even in her weakened state. She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes tracing the lines of his face as if memorizing him for a police sketch or a target. Then, without a single word of thanks or explanation, she turned and walked into the hills. Corbin watched her disappear into the heat shimmer, the scrub swallowing her whole. He told himself that would be the end of it. Drifters, prospectors, and natives passed through the territory often enough. She had gotten lost, gotten hurt, and now she was gone. That was that. He was wrong. Corbin Thorne had lived on the frontier long enough to know when the texture of the air changed. That evening, the routine of the ranch felt heavy. He fed the horses, checking the fence line where the wood had started to rot, and fixed a gate hinge that had been squeaking for weeks. But his mind kept circling back to her. The way she hadn't been afraid, not really. She had been aware, calculating. That night, lying on the narrow cot in his cabin, sleep refused to come. The silence of the valley was usually a comfort, filled only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, pregnant with intent. The horses were restless in the corral. He could hear them shifting, their hooves scraping nervously against the hard-packed dirt. Once, the bay gelding let out a sharp, piercing whinny that cut through the dark like a gunshot. Corbin sat up, listening, his hand hovering over his rifle. Nothing followed, just the wind pushing against the log walls. He lay back down, staring at the rough beams of the ceiling, telling himself it was just nerves. Tomorrow, he would ride out to the north pasture. Tomorrow, everything would go back to normal. He was still telling himself that when the sun rose, painting the sky in pale blues and blinding whites, Corbin stepped outside at first light, pulling his suspenders over his shoulders, a mug of coffee in hand. He took a sip, squinting against the glare, and looked out over the valley that stretched before him. The mug slipped from his fingers and shattered in the dust. At first, his brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. He thought they were shadows on the ridgeline, tricks of the morning light playing against the rock formations. But shadows didn't sit on horseback in perfect stillness. Shadows didn't hold rifles and spears that glinted in the dawn. He counted. 10, then 20, then 50. He stopped counting when he realized the futility of it. They lined the ridge to the north. It covered the hillside to the east. They silhouetted the slope that ran down to the dry creek bed on the west. Everywhere he looked, there were Apache warriors on horseback. They weren't advancing. They weren't making a sound. There were no war cries, no thundering hooves, no gunfire. They were simply there, surrounding his ranch like a noose pulled tight. Corbin's hand moved instinctively toward the repeating rifle leaning against the doorframe, but he stopped himself halfway. What good would one rifle do against an army? This wasn't a raiding party. Raiders moved fast, struck hard, stole horses, and disappeared before the dust settled. This was something else entirely. This was a siege. This was a message. His throat tightened, the taste of fear sharp and metallic in his mouth. He thought about the girl. The water. The way she had looked at him, as if summoned by the thought, a single rider broke from the group on the northern ridge. The horse picked its way down the rocky incline with the slow, deliberate precision of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to run. Corbin didn't run. He didn't reach for his weapon, just stood there in the middle of his yard. Boots rooted to the earth, watching the rider approach. The man stopped 50 feet away. He was older, his face a map of deep lines carved by sun and wind, his hair streaked with iron gray. He wore no war paint, but authority radiated from him like heat from a cast-iron stove. Behind him, on the ridges, 300 warriors watched. The silence was suffocating. The old warrior raised one hand. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a threat. He just held it there, palm out, waiting. Corbin's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the stillness. He had heard the stories. Everyone had. Stories of what the Apache did to settlers who encroached on their land. He had always assumed them to be exaggerations. Campfire tales meant to scare greenhorns. Standing here now under the gaze of a silent army, he wasn't so sure. The old warrior lowered his hands slowly, then dismounted. His movements were ceremonial. He walked forward 10 paces and stopped. He waited. Corbin understood. This was a test. If they wanted him dead, he would already be filled with arrows. They had all night to burn him out. They had waited for the sun. They wanted him to see them. Corbin forced himself to breathe. He stepped forward, matching the distance. 10 paces. He stopped. They stood facing each other across 50 feet of dusty ground. The warrior's eyes were black, obsidian, unreadable, and ancient. He carried no weapon in his hands, though a knife hung at his belt. Corbin kept his hands visible at his sides, open and empty. For a long moment, nothing happened. A hawk circled overhead, screaming into the void, oblivious to the tension below. Then, the old warrior raised his hand again. He pointed. Not at Corbin. At the well. Corbin's stomach dropped. The well? The water the warrior made, a gesture pouring drinking. The meaning was absolute. Corbin nodded slowly. Yes, he whispered, though the man couldn't hear him. I gave water. The warrior's expression didn't change, but he turned his head slightly and called out a sharp command in his own tongue. The sound echoed off the canyon walls. On the eastern ridge, the line of warriors parted, creating a gap. Through that gap, a single rider appeared. She rode a painted horse, sitting straight-backed and proud. She wore clean deerskin now, and turquoise beads around her neck. As she descended the slope, Corbin's breath caught. It was her. The girl from yesterday. But she wasn't a desperate, dying creature anymore. She was royalty. She rode straight to him, stopping 10 feet away, close enough for him to see the intelligence in her eyes. She looked at the old warrior, then back at Corbin. "You give water," she said. Her English was halting but clear, cutting through the silence. "Yes," Corbin replied. "You not know who?" she asked. "No." Corbin shook his head. "I just saw someone who needed help." She turned to the old warrior and spoke rapidly in Apache. Listened, his face impassive, then responded with a single guttural word. The girl turned back to Corbin, a strange light in her eyes. "My father, say you are brave, or you are a fool." "Father." The word hung in the dry air between them, heavier than the heat. Corbin looked at the old warrior, the chief ant, then back to the girl. The realization settled in his gut like a stone. He hadn't just helped a lost traveler. He had laid hands on the daughter of a warlord who commanded the hills. "I didn't know," Corbin said quietly. "That why you live," the girl replied. Her tone was flat, factual, devoid of comfort. "Man who know ... he try to get reward. Because thirsty person need water. That different." The old warrior spoke again, his voice rolling like distant thunder. The girl listened, her eyes never leaving Corbin's face, then translated. "My father say, I do test, walk alone 3 days. No food, no water. Prove strength, prove ready." She paused, a flicker of vulnerability touching her expression. "For the first time I fall, hit head, lose path. Your water save life." Corbin felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes pressing down from the ridges. "I'm glad you're all right." She tilted her head, studying him. "You not afraid?" "I'm terrified," Corbin admitted, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "But shooting or running won't change anything. So I'm standing here." Something, almost like amusement, touched her face. She spoke to her father again. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, then turned and walked back to his horse. The girl looked at Corbin one last time. "We watch," she said. "See if you speak truth or lie. See if you tell other white men where we are. See if you good ... or bad." "How long?" Corbin asked. She didn't answer. She just turned her painted horse and rode back up the slope. The old warrior mounted and followed. Corbin stood in his yard as the sun climbed higher, baking the valley floor. The warriors didn't leave. They settled into positions on the ridges, becoming part of the landscape, stone-still sentinels carved from the earth itself. He was a prisoner in his own home, and he had no idea how long the sentence would last. 3 days passed in a suffocating blur. The warriors remained on the ridges. They rotated positions with disciplined efficiency, but they never left. Smoke from their small fires rose into the indigo sky each evening, a constant reminder of the army at his doorstep. Corbin tried to go about his work, but every movement felt performative. He fed the horses under watchful eyes. He repaired fence posts, the hammer blows echoing too loudly in the silence. He drew water from the well, the same well that had started the sand, wondered if they were counting every drop. Sleep came in jagged fragments. Every snap of a twig, every shift of the wind jerked him awake, his hand cramping around the stock of his rifle. On the 4th morning, the dynamic shifted. Corbin woke to find a bundle wrapped in hide sitting by his front door. Inside, he found dried meat and a clay jar of water. He stared at it, the implication staggering. Were they providing for him because they respected him? Or were they merely keeping him alive long enough to finish their assessment? He ate the meat. It was tough, heavily salted, and tasted of smoke. But it was sustenance. By the 5th day, the isolation began to fray his nerves. He started talking to the horses just to hear a voice, even if it was his own. On the 6th day, the girl came back. She rode down alone this time, without the imposing shadow of her father. She stopped at the same spot as before, 10 feet from where Corbin stood in the yard. "You still here?" she said. "Didn't have much choice," Corbin replied, wiping sweat from his brow. She dismounted and walked closer. Up close, her height was even more striking. She stood nearly eye-to level with him. "You could run," she said. "At night, take horse, try, and get killed before I made it a mile." Corbin shook his head. "No thanks. You smart," she said. It sounded like a compliment, though her face remained neutral. "Most white men run. Get caught, get killed. You stay. Wait, what else can I do?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the well and looked down into the abyss. "Deep," she said. "Deep enough," Corbin agreed. "Doesn't run dry, even in summer. That why you live here. Good water. That's part of it." She turned back to him, her eyes hardening. "My people need water too. This land, used to be ours. Now, white men build fences, dig wells, take what was free." Corbin felt the stinging truth of that statement. He had bought this land legally, according to the laws written by men in cities who had never seen this valley, men who had never asked the Apache for permission. "I don't want trouble," he said carefully. "Trouble already here," she replied. "Question is, what you do with it." Before Corbin could respond, a sound shattered the morning peace. A gunshot, distant but unmistakable. Then another, then a third. The girl's head snapped toward the eastern ridge. The warriors up high were moving, shifting positions with sudden urgency. More shots echoed across the valley, rolling in from somewhere beyond the hills. The girl spoke rapidly in Apache, calling out to the nearest warriors. One of them shouted back, his voice sharp with warning. Her expression hardened into granite. She turned to Corbin. "White men coming. Many with guns." Corbin's blood ran cold. "How many?" 20, maybe more. "They hunt." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something other than neutrality in her eyes. It was a warning. Us. The gunshots were getting closer. Whoever was out there was moving fast, and they were headed straight for the valley. The girl mounted her horse in one fluid motion. "They find you with us, they kill you too. They think you enemy." "Where are you going?" She didn't answer. She kicked her horse into motion and rode hard for the ridge. The warriors were already pulling back, melting into the rocks, disappearing into the hills like smoke in a gale. Corbin stood alone in his yard as the sound of approaching horses grew louder, the thunder of hooves. Men's voices shouting, the chaotic excitement of a hunt. He had maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes to decide what he was going to say when a group of armed settlers found him standing in a valley that 300 Apache warriors had just abandoned. And he had absolutely no idea which side he was supposed to be on. They came thundering down the eastern trail like a storm breaking over the hills. Corbin counted 15 riders, with more trailing behind in the dust. They wore the rough clothes of settlers' canvas trousers, sweat-stained shirts, wide-brimmed hats pulled low. Every man carried a rifle. Some had revolvers at their hips. They rode hard, their faces flushed with the heat of the chase. The lead rider spotted Corbin and raised a hand. The group pulled up 30 yards from the cabin, their horses breathing. Hard foam white on their necks. "You alone here." The lead rider called out. He was a broad man with a thick, unkempt beard and eyes that darted constantly, scanning the perimeter. "Just me," Corbin said. He kept his voice steady, his hands visible and away from his waist. "You see any Apache come through here?" Another rider pushed forward, younger, with a rifle already unslung and resting across his saddle horn. "We've been tracking a war party. Saw smoke signals yesterday." Trail led straight to this valley. Corbin's mind raced. He could lie. He could tell them the Apache had passed through hours ago. But these men weren't fools. They were trackers. They had seen the signs. "I've seen signs," Corbin said carefully, "but they're gone now." The bearded man squinted at him, his hand drifting toward his holster. "Gone where?" "North, I think. Heard horses moving out about 20 minutes ago." It wasn't entirely a lie. The warriors had pulled back into the hills, but north was a guess. A deflection. The young rider looked suspicious. "You got a lot of nerve living out here alone. Apache territory." "It's my land," Corbin said. "Bought and paid for." "Apache don't care about deeds and titles." The bearded man spat into the dirt. He dismounted and walked closer, the leather of his chaps creaking. "You're lucky they haven't killed you already." "Maybe I'm not worth killing," Corbin replied. The man laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "We're part of a volunteer militia. Been hunting a group that raided a settlement 2 weeks south. Burned 3 homesteads, killed a family." He stepped into Corbin's personal space. "We aim to make them pay." Corbin's stomach tightened. "You sure it was Apache?" "Tracks don't lie," the young rider interjected. "War party came through. Followed them here." The bearded man studied Corbin's face, looking for a crack. "You seem awful calm for a man who just had hostiles camped on his doorstep." "Panic doesn't help anything," Corbin said. "You hiding something?" "Just trying to stay alive," Corbin said. "Same as anyone." The bearded man walked past him toward the cabin. "Mind if we look around? Get some water for the horses?" It wasn't a request. Corbin nodded. "Help yourself." The men dismounted and spread out. Some led horses to the water trough. Others walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking the dirt. "Okay." The young rider stayed mounted, his rifle barrel tracking Corbin. "You got supplies in there?" the bearded man asked from the doorway. "Enough to get by." "Good. We'll take whatever you can spare." He turned to face Corbin directly. "And you're going to tell us exactly where those Apache went." Corbin followed him inside. As they reached the door, he caught a flicker of movement on the western ridge. Just a shift of shadow. The Apache hadn't left. They were watching. And if these militiamen found them, this valley was going to become a graveyard. "You got coffee?" the bearded man asked, rifling through the shelves. "Some. We'll take it." Ideally, the man wanted more than coffee. He wanted a target. Outside, a shout went up. "Found fresh tracks?" "Lots of them. They ain't far." The bearded man scanned the ridges. Nothing was visible, just rock and scrub, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. "Mount up," he ordered, his voice cracking. "We're leaving now. We came here to fight." One man protested weakly. "We came to fight raiders, not an army on their own ground." The bearded man shouted. He swung into his saddle. "Move." The men scrambled. The young rider kept his rifle pointed at the ridges, backing his horse away. Within seconds, the dust was rising as they spurred their mounts, turning back toward the south. Away from the unseen eyes in the hills, Corbin stood alone in the swirling dust. The thunder of their retreat faded. The calls from the hills stopped. Silence returned to the valley, then movement. From the ridge, the girl appeared first, riding down on her painted horse. Behind her, the chief. Behind him, a dozen warriors. They rode down slowly, reclaiming the space the militia had fled. The chief dismounted and walked straight to Corbin's cabin door. He didn't ask permission, simply opened it and stepped inside. The girl followed. Corbin, feeling like a guest in his own life, walked in after them. The chief stood in the center of the small room, looking at the sparse furniture. He turned to Corbin. "Now," the girl translated, her voice soft but firm. "Now we talk." The chief pulled out a rough-hewn chair from the table and sat. The wood groaned under his weight, a sound that seemed too loud in the sudden intimacy of the cabin. He gestured for Corbin to sit. Nijoni remained standing, positioning herself where she could see both men and the Dora habit born of a life spent at war. "My name," she said, introducing herself formally for the first time, "is Nijoni. It means beautiful in our language. White men make jokes because I am tall, but my father says I am beautiful like a mountain, strong, tall, unmovable." "It's a good name," Corbin said, taking the seat opposite the chief. "And your father?" "His name is not for you to say," Nijoni replied. Her tone wasn't hostile, just matter of fact. "He is chief. That is enough." The chief spoke then, his voice low and measured, the guttural sounds of his language filling the small room. Nijoni translated in segments, letting him finish his thoughts, before converting them to English. "You give water to me when I fall," she said, echoing her father's words. "You not ask for payment, you not ask for favor. You not try to touch me or keep me. You give what I need and let me go." She paused as her father continued, his dark eyes locking onto Corbin's. "This not normal for white men. They take, they demand, they hurt. But you, you just give." Corbin met the chief's gaze. She needed help. That's all. "My father say his test was hard test," Nijoni continued. 6 days watching. 6 days waiting to see if you run to town. If you tell soldiers where we camp, if you sell information for gold or safety." Her voice became clinical, detached. "You do none of these things. Men come with guns looking for us. You could tell them, make them happy, make them think you are good white man who helps kill Apache." "I don't want to kill anyone," Corbin said softly. "But you also not want to die," the chief said through Nijoni. "Smart man who want die is useless. Man who want to live, who choose how to live. This is valuable man." The chief reached into a leather pouch at his belt. He pulled out something, wrapped in cloth, and set it on the table, unwrapping it slowly with calloused fingers. Inside lay a necklace, intricate beadwork on soft leather. A distinctive pattern of blue and white beads arranged in a jagged, lightning-like design. "This mark of protection," Nijoni explained. "You wear this, my people know you are friend. They will not harm you. They will not take from you. You are under protection of our tribe." Corbin stared at the beads, catching the light from the single window. "I don't understand. Why?" "'Cause you show honor when you not have to," Nijoni said. "Because my father see in you something rare. White man who understand that land belong to all. That water is for thirsty. That human being is human being." The chief spoke again, longer this time, his hands sweeping over the table as if mapping the territory. "My father say this land once, all Apache land," she translated. "Water flow free, one free. Then white men come with paper that say they own what cannot be owned. They put up fences, they dig wells. They say this is mine, that is yours. You cannot pass here." She paused, her eyes softening slightly. "But you are different. You have fence, yes. You have well, yes. But when person need water, you give. You do not ask if person is Apache or white, if person is Christian or not. You just give water to thirsty person. Anyone would do the same." Corbin demurred. "No," the chief said in English. The single word cracked like a whip. He continued. In Apache, and Nijoni translated, "Most men would not. Most men see Apache girl and think danger, think problem, think opportunity. You see thirsty person. That is difference." The chief stood and pushed the necklace across the table toward Corbin. "You take, you wear. You are protected." Corbin picked up the necklace. The leather was soft, the craftsmanship exquisite. But he knew what this was. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a flag. "What does this mean for me?" Corbin asked. From my ranch, Najoni and her father exchanged a look. Then she spoke without waiting for translation. "It means you can live in peace. My people will not trouble you. We will watch over your land when you are gone. If other Apache come through, we tell them you are friend." She stepped closer to the table. "But there is more." Corbin waited. "Those white men. They will come back," she said. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But they will come. They want fight Apache. They want revenge. If you wear this, ... if they see it, they will think you are traitor. They will not understand. They will want hurt you too." The chief spoke one final time, short, definite. "My father say, choose carefully. Protection from us mean danger from them. You cannot have both." Corbin held the necklace in his hands, feeling the weight of the choice. It was a line drawn in the dust. A T thought about the militiamen who had just left the bearded man's hard eyes. The young riders triggered happy suspicion. If they came back and found him wearing Apache symbols, they wouldn't ask questions. He would be branded a turncoat, a traitor to his own kind. But who were his own kind? Men who hunted human beings for sport. Men who claimed land by force and called it justice. He looked at Nijon. She stood tall and straight, waiting for his answer with the patience of the mountain she was named for. She had been dying of thirst, and he had given her water. That simple act had brought an army to his door, not to destroy him, but to understand him. Corbin lifted the necklace and placed it over his head. The beadwork settled against his chest, cool against his skin. "I choose to live with honor," he said, "same as I've been trying to do all along." The chief's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. A slight nod, a recognition. He stood and placed one hand briefly on Corbin's shoulder. Gesture that bridged the gap between their worlds. Najoni spoke to her father, then turned back to Corbin. "My father say, you're brave or stupid. Maybe both." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He also say, stupid, brave men sometimes become legends." "I'm not looking to be a legend," Corbin said. "I just want to live in peace." "Peace take more courage than war," Najoni said. "Anybody can fight. Take special person to choose not fight when everyone else want blood." The chief moved toward the door. Nijon followed, but paused at the threshold. "You have questions?" she asked. "A lot of them," Corbin admitted, "but I guess they can wait." "Ask one," she said. "While my father is here, while words still mean something." Corbin thought for a moment. "That test you were doing? The 3 days alone with no food or water. Did you pass?" Najoni's expression became unreadable. "I survive. That is pass. But not the way I plan. I fall. I need help. Some say that mean I fail. And what do you say?" "I say I learn more falling than I would staying strong," she said. She glanced at her father. "Sometimes lesson come from place you not expect. Sometimes strength is knowing when to accept help." Outside, the chief gave a call. Not harsh, but commanding. Najoni stepped through the door. "My people leave now. We go north to summer grounds. White men make it hard to stay anywhere long. Always pushing, always taking. Will you come back?" Corbin asked. "Maybe if we need water?" She looked back at him. "We need to remind ourselves that not all white men are same." She walked to her horse and mounted in one smooth motion. The chief was already in the saddle. The warriors gathered behind him. They were pulling back, leaving the valley, the siege dissolving like mist. Corbin stood in his doorway and watched them ride out. Najoni looked back once, raising her hand in a gesture that might have been farewell or acknowledgement. Then they were gone, disappearing into the hills. The valley fell silent. Corbin touched the necklace at his chest. The beadwork was warming against his skin. he was protected. He was also marked. Somewhere to the south, 15 armed men were riding back to their settlement with stories about Apache warriors in these hills. Stories that would bring more men, more guns. The peace he wanted felt further away than ever. But at least now he knew where he stood. 3 weeks passed. The valley settled into an uneasy quiet. Corbin worked his land, tended his animals, and kept the necklace visible on his chest. He didn't hide it. He didn't take it off. If trouble was coming, he would meet it on his own terms. The trouble came on a Tuesday morning. Dust rose on the southern trail. Riders moving fast. Corbin counted 8 men, this time fewer than before, but better armed. The bearded militia leader was back, and he had brought hard men with him. They rode straight to the ranch and formed a half circle around the yard, rifles resting on their thighs. "We heard rumors," the bearded man called out, his voice scratching across the distance. "Heard a rancher out here's been trading with the enemy." His eyes locked onto the necklace. The blue and white beads flashed in the sun. "Guess the rumors were true," he spat. Corbin stood his ground near the well. "I'm not trading with anyone. I'm living in peace." "That's Apache beadwork," the young rider from before shouted, his voice tight with anger. "You're wearing their colors. That makes you one of them." "It makes me someone they won't kill," Corbin replied calmly. "Seems like a practical choice in hostile territory." "It makes you a traitor," the bearded man said. He dismounted slowly, his hand hovering near his revolver. "We came here to give you a chance to explain yourself. But looking at you now, I don't think there's much to explain." Corbin touched the necklace at his chest. It had cost him the trust of his own people, but it had earned him something more valuable. Genuine peace in a land where peace was as rare as rain. He went inside his cabin, lit a lamp against the coming dark, and sat down to a simple meal. Outside, the valley stretched silent under the first stars. No armies watching, no men hunting. Just land and sky, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is choose not to fight. Corbin Thorne had given water to a girl who needed it. In return, he'd found something he didn't know he was looking for. A way to live with honor in a land where honor was becoming extinct. The choice had been simple. The consequences were hard. But he'd make the same choice again if asked. That was enough.